Welcome back to How to F1. Now that we've covered the real basic parts of the W12, or at least the things that you really need to know before jumping into a fixed race, we'll go ahead and start covering some slightly more advanced topics like in-car adjustments. Don't worry, I'll still try to keep it as simple as possible. If you've ever looked at a Formula 1 steering wheel, you'll notice a ton of buttons, knobs, switches, etc. Some of these settings are available to us in iRacing, but fortunately, they're not nearly as complicated or convoluted as the real deal. We already went over the available ERS modes in the last video, so I won't worry about those here. The first setting available besides the ERS is brake bias course adjustment. This setting is the only setting you can adjust in a fixed setup race, and adjust the brake bias forward and back in 0.5% increments with a minimum of 54%. The next setting is brake bias fine. This setting also moves brake bias forward and back, but in 0.1% increments. This seems to be more of a fine-tuning adjustment and can only be adjusted 10 clicks one way or the other from 0. One thing to note about brake bias fine and brake bias coarse is they affect the overall brake bias on the car. Next is brake migration. This setting allows you to have a difference between the initial brake bias when you touch the brakes and what the top end brake bias is when you are past a certain point in brake pedal travel. This was known as peak brake bias in the McLaren. You can see this difference when sitting in a pit box and looking at your steering wheel. You will notice on the warm-up tab screen that there are two numbers and a small rectangle on the right-hand side. When stationary, the larger number is your peak brake bias and the smaller number is your minimum brake bias. When moving, the larger number will equal the smaller number until you apply the brakes, and then the number moves up, telling you the highest amount of brake bias you've reached. The next setting is brake magic. This is the infamous setting Lewis Hamilton had on when he restarted the race in Baku and slid off the track in turn 1 when the brakes locked up. In the real world, drivers use this setting on outlaps before a qualifying lap, during a formation lap, and when following the safety car in order to help maintain heat in the front brakes and tires. In iRacing, this setting is only really useful on your outlap in qualifying and possibly a warm-up lap, since we do not have formation laps or caution laps in the races. Just don't forget to turn the system off before starting your first flying lap, as you will quickly lock up the tires and slide off the track as Lewis did. The next three settings have to do with the differential. Entry diff allows for the locking and unlocking of the differential when entering a corner off throttle. A smaller number means a more open differential and therefore generally more oversteer entering the corner. Mid-diff affects the car in transition between coming off the brakes and initial throttle application. This time, a lower number means more locking and stability, and a higher number means less locking and more oversteer when applying throttle. Finally, high-speed diff affects the differential on late exit with more throttle application. Like mid-diff, a lower number means more locking and stability, higher number, less locking, and more oversteer. These settings are useful to adjust in race if you need more stability entering a corner or more turn-in the center and exit of the corner on throttle. These settings are also useful to help minimize wheel spin when adding throttle through the corner. Finally, as far as settings that affect the car's performance goes, is engine braking. This system assists the car's braking system in slowing down for a corner by using the engine and gearbox. The lower number means more engine braking, higher number means less. This can be useful to help slow the car down faster, but with less brakes and less chance of locking up the tires, but can also create some instability if the number is too low, and can create more heat in the tires when slowing down for a corner. The last setting in the in-car adjustments tab is the display mode, which changes from warm-up to race. Typically, I leave the display mode on warm-up as it shows your tire temperature during the course of a run. We'll discuss the dash a little later on. All of these settings can be used strategically during a race to manage the car's handling and tire temperatures. The best of the best drivers in this car change these settings throughout the race or even corner by corner in order to maximize performance. However, this is really only necessary when you're looking for the last tenths or hundredths of a second at the top end of the field. For the rest of us normal people, you can go the entire race without ever looking at these adjustments and be perfectly competitive. In the next video, I'll cover techniques for launching the car from a start, pit stops, and qualifying techniques. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.